Earth stops spinning. For the first time in ages, the planet simply comes to a halt. Everything else keeps moving eastward at a speed that feels unreal. What happens when the foundation of everything stops moving? The force that held everything in place goes silent. Ordinary becomes impossible. Before we begin, drop a quick comment about where you're listening from. I read every one, and they help shape future explorations. If you enjoy these thought experiments, subscribe, but only if you genuinely want more. The first moment changes everything. A bedroom at night. A woman sleeps peacefully. Earth stops rotating. Her body launches eastward through the bedroom wall. She keeps the speed she already had. The wall crumbles as she hits it at highway speed. Every person on the planet gets the same shove. Children launch from their beds. A man brushing his teeth flies through his bathroom mirror. Glass cuts his face as he tumbles through the air. Bodies twist sideways, trying to find a floor that isn't there. Arms and legs flail, catching only air. A small child turns into a flying weight, heavy and unstoppable. In major cities, crowds slam into east-facing walls almost at once. Concrete cracks, windows explode outward. Emergency sirens never sound. Too many people are already down. Bodies lie motionless against eastern walls. Highway overpass at dawn. Morning commuters drive toward work. The planet's rotation ceases. Every car becomes airborne instantly. A sedan traveling eastward suddenly outruns the road beneath it. Metal screams against asphalt before the vehicle lifts off completely. A passenger train derails. The train keeps sliding even as the rails go still. Metal wheels skid off rigid tracks with sparks shooting in all directions. Passenger cars tip sideways, one after another. Fuel tanks rupture on impact. Diesel spreads across tilted rail cars. The smell of gasoline fills the air around overturned vehicles. Ships in distant harbors slide across dry land. A massive cargo vessel plows through soil and concrete. Its hull grinds against the earth as it gets shoved far inland. Aircraft face stranger forces. Pilots watch their instruments spike. Engines strain against a shove they never trained for. Metal and concrete litter every transportation route. A coastal beach before sunrise. Waves lap gently against the shore. Earth's rotation stops. The ocean keeps moving east. Water slides on as if the ground slipped away beneath it. It pours across motionless continents. A fishing boat anchored near the harbor watches the sea floor appear beneath its hull. The captain grabs his radio. The ocean retreats eastward, like a tide running backward. Sand and seaweed emerge where deep water had existed moments before. The eastern coastline faces a wall of water moving at unstoppable speed. The ocean arrives not as waves, but as a solid mass of salt water. Buildings disappear beneath the surge. Cars float for a heartbeat, then vanish under the crushing weight of the sea. Underwater pressure collapses basement walls. Salt water fills subway tunnels and underground parking garages. Fish swim through shopping mall corridors as the ocean claims territory that had been dry land for centuries. The eastern shores drown beneath the weight of the world's water. A downtown office building. Workers arrive for their morning shift. Earth stops spinning. The building's foundation shudders under a sideways pull. Steel beams meant for straight-down weight take the strain. Rivets pop with sharp snaps as the structure tilts eastward. Glass windows on the eastern face explode outward under the pressure of the building's own weight. Office workers inside grab their desks as furniture slides across tilted floors. File cabinets tip over and crash through interior walls. A skyscraper designed to flex with wind cannot adapt to this sideways pull. Concrete cracks run up the eastern wall in jagged lightning patterns. The building groans. Metal and stone complain in low, wrong notes. Elevators become death traps. Cables snap as elevator cars slam into shaft walls. Emergency stairwells buckle as the building keeps leaning east. Cities built over lifetimes collapse in moments. A residential neighborhood. Families eat breakfast in their kitchens. The planet stops rotating. The atmosphere keeps moving east. Air that had spun with Earth surges across a stationary surface. A wind unlike anything in human history sweeps across every continent. Roof tiles rip away from houses like paper. Trees that had weathered decades of storms snap at their trunks. The air itself tears at skin and lungs faster than any hurricane. A child's backpack flies through the kitchen window. Dust and debris fill the air so thickly that breathing becomes impossible. The family huddles in their basement as their house disintegrates above them. Cars parked in driveways flip over from the wind force alone. Street signs bend until they snap. Power lines whip through the air like enormous electrified snakes. The atmosphere that had protected life on Earth becomes the final blow. A man steps onto his bathroom scale. The digital display flickers. His weight reads higher than yesterday. His knees buckle slightly under the unfamiliar pressure. The extra pounds feel concentrated in his bones and joints. Each step toward the kitchen requires more effort than his muscles remember. A child struggles to lift her backpack. The same bag she carried easily yesterday now feels stuffed with rocks. Her shoulders ache as the straps dig deeper into her flesh. Hospital patients notice the change first. An elderly woman grips her walker with white knuckles as her arthritis flares with sudden intensity. The weight pressing down on her spine increases with each breath. Athletes training for morning workouts discover their bodies betray them. A runner's usual pace becomes impossible as his legs carry unexpected burden. Sweat beads form on his forehead after covering half his normal distance. Bodies adapted to a lighter existence suddenly confront their true mass. A GPS device in a delivery truck. The screen shows signal lost. Stars begin falling from the sky. Communication satellites drift from their assigned positions like leaves in a cosmic wind. Their orbits sag. Earth's pull drags them down. A weather satellite tumbles through the upper atmosphere. Its solar panels tear away as air resistance increases. Metal fragments heat to glowing orange as they streak toward the surface. Cell phone towers lose contact with their orbital partners. Emergency dispatchers watch their screens go dark one by one. Radio static replaces clear signals across every frequency. Aircraft pilots notice their navigation systems failing simultaneously. Flight instruments that had guided planes for decades now display error messages. Pilots grip their controls tighter as they lose electronic guidance. A television news anchor watches her teleprompter freeze mid-sentence. The satellite uplink feeding her stories dies completely. She faces the camera with nothing but her own voice. Metal debris rains from the sky like deadly confetti. Oceanfront property at low tide. A homeowner waters his garden. The sea retreats beyond the horizon. Coastlines shift as Earth's equatorial bulge flattens toward the poles. Equatorial water starts sliding toward the poles. The planet's surface takes a new waterline. A fishing pier extends over dry sand where deep water had existed for generations. Boats sit stranded on exposed seafloor. Barnacles and seaweed cling to pier supports that had never seen sunlight. Polar regions experience the opposite transformation. Ice sheets crack under rising water levels as the ocean seeks its new equilibrium. Research stations built on solid ground find themselves surrounded by encroaching seas. A lighthouse keeper watches his beacon illuminate empty air, where ships once navigated dangerous waters. The reef that had claimed vessels for centuries now sits exposed like a massive coral sculpture. Basement flooding begins in polar cities as groundwater tables shift with the redistributed ocean mass. Sump pumps work overtime against water that seeps through foundation cracks. The planet reshapes itself while humanity watches helplessly from the surface. A tidal pool at sunrise. Marine life prepares for the regular flood. The water never comes. Tide charts become worthless documents. Ocean rhythms break their ancient patterns. Harbors designed around predictable water levels find their docks either submerged or elevated above empty water. A crab waits in its tidal pool as the expected wave fails to arrive. Small fish trapped in the shrinking water circle desperately as their temporary home evaporates under the sun. Commercial fishing boats sit stranded in harbors that should be deep enough for navigation. Captains radio the Coast Guard for explanations that no one can provide. Their depth finders show measurements that contradict decades of experience. Coastal power plants designed to use tidal flow for cooling discover their intake pipes exposed to air. Engineers scramble to find alternative water sources as their nuclear reactors demand constant cooling. A child builds sandcastles where high tide should have washed away her morning's work. The moat around her fortress remains perfectly dry as the sun climbs higher. Ocean rhythms older than human civilization falter for the first time. An Aurora research station in Alaska. Scientists monitor the northern lights. The sky begins to flicker strangely. Earth's magnetic field wavers. Compass needles swing wildly. Magnetic north turns into an unstable concept. Electronic equipment in hospitals begins malfunctioning without warning. Pacemakers skip beats as magnetic interference increases. MRI machines produce distorted images as their magnetic fields interact with planetary chaos. Airline pilots notice their magnetic compasses spinning freely. Navigation instruments designed to point toward magnetic north now point in random directions. Emergency backup systems fail as the magnetic environment shifts beyond their tolerance. A ham radio operator listens to static that grows louder each minute. Solar radiation that normally deflects around Earth's magnetic shield now penetrates deeper into the atmosphere. His radio receives signals from impossible distances as the ionosphere restructures itself. Airport runways marked with magnetic headings become navigation hazards as the numbers no longer correspond to reality. Air traffic controllers guide planes using only visual landmarks and GPS satellites that still function. The invisible shield protecting all life begins to crack. Dark clouds gather over the Atlantic. A hurricane eye loses its perfect circle. Winds begin moving in straight lines. The storm that had spun counterclockwise for days suddenly breaks its circular pattern. Wind gusts that should curve with Earth's rotation now blow directly forward. Meteorologists watch satellite feeds that show weather patterns contradicting every textbook. A weather balloon releases from the storm's edge and travels in a perfectly straight line instead of the expected arc. Its instruments record airflow directions that make no sense to the tracking station below. Coastal towns prepare for a hurricane that moves like no storm in recorded history. Emergency coordinators find their evacuation models useless as the storm refuses to follow predictable paths. A lighthouse keeper watches waves approach from impossible directions. The sea churns with patterns that violate everything he learned about storms over decades on the coast. Storms forget how to dance with the spinning earth. A commercial pilot grips his controls. His instruments show impossible wind readings. The jet stream disappears beneath his aircraft. High-altitude winds that guided aircraft for decades simply vanish. The invisible highways pilots used to save fuel and time no longer exist. Flight paths that once rode predictable air currents now require constant course corrections. Air traffic controllers watch their screens fill with emergency signals. Hundreds of aircraft report turbulence in areas that had been smooth for generations. Fuel gauges drop faster than calculated as planes struggle against unpredictable headwinds. A cargo plane shudders through air pockets that appear without warning. The pilot feels his aircraft buck like an angry horse as stable air masses collapse into chaotic gusts. Airport wind socks hang limp for minutes before snapping to attention in random directions. Ground crews cancel takeoffs as crosswinds exceed safety limits without any advance warning. Navigation becomes guesswork in skies that refuse to behave. Factory smokestacks release their morning pollution. Gray exhaust hangs motionless in the air. Visibility drops to 50 feet. Industrial emissions that normally dispersed across vast distances now accumulate directly above their sources. Smoke from power plants forms dense columns that stretch straight up without any horizontal drift. A traffic cop puts on his respirator as car exhaust pools at street level. The intersection he has patrolled for years becomes difficult to see across. Vehicle emissions create toxic clouds around every stoplight. Hospital emergency rooms fill with patients struggling to breathe. Nurses distribute oxygen masks as air quality drops to dangerous levels within hours. Asthmatics arrive in waves seeking relief from air their lungs cannot process. A child's playground empties as parents notice their children coughing after minutes of outdoor play. Swings move only when pushed as the air around them becomes too thick with pollutants. Cities suffocate under their own industrial breath. Morning dew clings to grass blades. Fog forms and refuses to lift. Some neighborhoods disappear under permanent mist. Water vapor that should rise and disperse with normal air currents instead settles into stationary columns. Clouds form in valleys and remain there, fixed in place. Mountain communities find themselves permanently shrouded in mist. A farmer watches his fields vanish under a fog bank that shows no signs of moving. Crops that need sunlight for photosynthesis begin to yellow under the perpetual gray cover. Desert regions experience the opposite phenomenon. Clear skies lock into place as moisture-carrying winds cease to exist. Rain clouds that normally bring seasonal relief fail to develop at all. A weather station records humidity levels that climb steadily without the usual daily fluctuations. Moisture accumulates in some areas while others dry to dangerous levels. Water hangs in the air like suspended judgment. A thermometer sits outside a kitchen window. The reading climbs steadily all morning. No breeze carries the heat away. Daytime temperatures rise without the cooling relief of moving air. Heat that normally dispersed across regions now builds in concentrated pockets. Asphalt becomes too hot to touch as thermal energy accumulates without escape. An elderly man opens his windows seeking relief that never comes. The air conditioning unit outside his house struggles against heat that refuses to dissipate. His power bill climbs as the unit runs continuously without achieving comfortable temperatures. Nightfall brings no cooling. Heat trapped near the ground during the day has nowhere to go without air currents to carry it skyward. Temperatures that should drop after sunset remain dangerously high. A dog pants continuously in its owner's backyard as shade provides no relief from accumulated heat. Water bowls warm to uncomfortable temperatures within minutes of being refilled. Hot and cold air masses collide along permanent boundaries. A fishing boat drifts in the Gulf Stream. The captain checks his position twice. His boat sits motionless in water that should be moving. Ocean currents that had flowed for millions of years simply stop. The invisible rivers that carried warm water from the tropics to northern seas become stagnant pools. A current meter drag behind the boat registers zero movement for the first time in its operational history. Marine biologists aboard research vessels watch their instruments with growing concern. Water samples show temperature readings that stay constant. The usual gradual variations are gone. A message buoy deployed to test current speed floats exactly where scientists dropped it hours earlier. The GPS tracker shows no movement despite being placed in what should be the fastest flowing section of the Atlantic circulation. Dolphins that normally ride the current edges swim in confused circles. Their navigation instincts fail as the underwater highways they have followed for generations disappear completely. The ocean holds its breath for what feels like the first time in geological history. Schools of fish swim near the surface. Their gills work frantically. Oxygen-rich water no longer reaches the depths. Deep-sea creatures begin rising toward the surface as oxygen levels plummet in the ocean's lower layers. Fish that have never seen sunlight appear near coastal waters with their bodies already showing signs of distress. A commercial fisherman hauls in nets filled with dead fish that should have been thriving in deeper waters. Their gills show the telltale signs of oxygen starvation. The smell of decomposition reaches the boat before the nets break the surface. Whale pods surface more frequently as they search for oxygen-rich water near the top. Their usual diving patterns become impossible as the deep ocean turns into an underwater desert devoid of breathable water. Coral reefs begin to bleach as the algae inside them struggle without the steady flow of nutrient-rich water. Divers report visibility dropping as dying plankton clouds the water with organic debris. Life suffocates in the ocean's stagnant embrace. Ice forms on a ship's hull in tropical waters. The crew shivers despite their southern latitude. Heat from the equator no longer travels north. Northern coastlines experience temperatures that drop below freezing as warm water from the south fails to arrive. Ports that have operated year-round for centuries find themselves blocked by ice formations that appear seemingly overnight. A lighthouse keeper in Maine watches ice sheets form in waters that had remained liquid through previous winters. His heating oil reserves dwindle as he faces Arctic conditions without warning or preparation. Tropical regions become unbearably hot as their excess heat has nowhere to go. Ocean temperatures near the equator rise beyond the tolerance levels of marine life that evolved to depend on cooler currents for relief. A cruise ship designed for Caribbean waters keeps moving. Passengers huddle in their cabins as the ship's air conditioning systems strain. The water outside climbs beyond what the cooling can fight. Thermal boundaries lock into place like permanent prison walls. A submarine descends through the water column. The sonar operator notices strange readings. Dense layers form at specific depths. Ocean water begins separating into distinct layers as circulation fails to mix different density zones. Salt content varies dramatically between depths as the natural stirring action of currents ceases completely. A deep-sea research vessel discovers water so dense at certain levels that their equipment behaves differently than expected. Instruments calibrated for normal ocean conditions produce readings that no longer match reality. Marine archaeology expeditions find their diving operations complicated by water layers that create underwater mirages. Objects appear at different distances than they actually are. Light bends through density variations. A commercial salvage operation abandons its mission as diving equipment fails to function properly. The water behaves like separate environments stacked on top of each other. The ocean becomes a tower of isolated worlds. A great white shark circles the same patch of water. Its electromagnetic sensors detect no movement. Prey species scatter without their usual patterns. Ocean predators that rely on current-driven migrations find their hunting grounds empty. Sharks that have followed the same routes for thousands of generations swim in confused spirals. Their prey vanishes from traditional feeding areas. Tuna populations cluster in random locations instead of following their ancestral paths across ocean basins. Commercial fishing fleets find their nets empty in areas that should teem with fish during peak migration seasons. A seal colony on a remote island watches the water around them go bare. The fish schools they depend on no longer arrive. Seabirds circle endlessly above waters that no longer offer predictable feeding. Their cries echo across empty seas as they search for fish that have lost their way in the current-less void. Hunger spreads through food chains built on moving water. Heat radiates from cracked asphalt. A construction worker collapses beside his truck. Sweat evaporates before it can cool his skin. The eastern hemisphere bakes under continuous sunlight that will not let up. Temperatures climb beyond anything human settlements were designed to withstand. Metal playground equipment becomes too hot to touch. A mother pulls her children indoors as their shoes begin to smoke on the sidewalk. The rubber soles leave black marks on pavement that glows with accumulated heat. Air conditioning units strain against temperatures they cannot overcome. Office buildings empty as workers flee glass towers that have become solar ovens. Windows that once provided natural light now focus the sun's energy into deadly heat traps. Elevator shafts become vertical furnaces. A dog refuses to walk on concrete that burns its paws. Its owner carries it across streets that shimmer with heat waves. Water bowls placed in shade still warm to scalding temperatures within minutes. The sun holds half the world hostage without mercy. Frost forms on a bedroom window. A family huddles under every blanket they own. Their breath creates clouds in the living room. The Western Hemisphere plunges into a darkness that has lasted for hours without any hint of dawn. Temperatures drop below freezing as the Earth releases its stored heat into the void of space. A farmer watches his crops wither as ice crystals form on leaves that had been green that morning. Irrigation pipes burst as water freezes and expands. Livestock cluster together for warmth in barns that provide little protection. City streets become treacherous as water mains freeze and burst. Ice forms on roads that had never experienced winter conditions. Cars slide helplessly on surfaces that turn from wet to frozen within minutes. An elderly woman shivers in her apartment as her heating system struggles against the relentless cold. Her fingers turn white as circulation slows in the dropping temperature. Blankets provide insufficient warmth against the advancing freeze. Winter claims territories that had never known snow. A refugee family walks along a highway. They carry their possessions toward the horizon. Behind them, their house burns in perpetual sunlight. The narrow band between scorching heat and deadly cold becomes humanity's only refuge. Millions of people begin moving toward the twilight zone where temperatures remain survivable. Cars loaded with belongings clog roads, leading to the day-night boundary. Families abandon homes that have become uninhabitable as they seek the thin strip of tolerable climate. A gas station at the boundary line runs out of fuel within hours as desperate travelers converge on the area. The owner watches his parking lot fill with vehicles as people set up temporary camps wherever shade meets cold. Children cry in the back seats of overheated cars. Their parents navigate traffic jams that stretch for miles. Water bottles become precious commodities as families ration their supplies for the journey to survivable temperatures. The twilight zone becomes humanity's final gathering place. Leaves wilt on a tomato plant. A gardener waters soil that steams in the heat. His vegetables cook while still growing. Plants in the perpetual day zone sag under constant sunlight. Leaves keep gulping light until their edges blister and brown. A greenhouse operator watches his entire crop yellow and die within hours. Glass walls that once protected delicate plants now focus the sun's heat into an inescapable furnace. Sprinkler systems provide no relief as water evaporates before it reaches the soil. Forests in the dark zone experience the opposite death. Trees that live on daily light begin to starve in the darkness. Leaves drop from branches as the plants exhaust their stored energy reserves. A park ranger finds pine trunks splitting as they snap between freeze and thaw. Bark splits with sharp cracks that echo through the silent woods. Plants die on both sides of the shadow that cuts across the world. A rooster crows continuously, its internal clock shattered by endless daylight. The bird calls for a dawn that never comes. Animals across both hemispheres lose their internal clocks as the natural cycle of light and dark disappears. Nocturnal creatures in the day zone emerge at inappropriate times, confused by the persistent brightness. A barn owl flies in circles during what should be noon, its hunting instincts triggered by internal signals that no longer match the external world. The bird crashes into obstacles as it attempts to navigate in broad daylight. Zoo animals pace their enclosures restlessly as feeding times lose all meaning. Lions that should sleep during the heat become agitated and vocal. Elephants stand motionless, swaying with confusion as their biological clocks malfunction. A migration of birds begins flying in random directions as their magnetic navigation systems conflict with light cues that make no sense. Flocks break apart as individual birds follow different internal compasses. Time itself becomes meaningless for creatures built on ancient rhythms. Power lines stretch across a mountainous landscape. Transformers spark and fail under impossible demand. One side draws maximum power, while the other side goes dark. Grids built for gentle swings begin to groan. In the perpetual day, air conditioning pulls until the system buckles. In the frozen dark, heaters strain the same overwhelmed network. A utility worker climbs a smoking transformer as sparks shower down around him. His radio crackles with emergency calls from substations across the region. Each report carries the same sound of cascading failure. Cooling centers in the scorching zone lose power just when refugees need them most. Families who fled their overheated homes find themselves trapped in buildings that become furnaces without air conditioning. A hospital administrator watches life support machines shut down one by one as backup generators overheat. The smell of burning diesel fills the basement as emergency power systems fail under continuous operation. Darkness spreads across both hemispheres for different reasons. A farmer kneels beside his wheat field. Stalks that should stand golden lie blackened and brittle. Hours of continuous sun have cooked the grain while it grew. Crops across the day zone burn in their fields under the unbroken sun. Corn ears shrivel on stalks that cannot handle the overwhelming light. Irrigation systems pump water that evaporates before reaching the roots. A dairy cow collapses in a pasture where grass has turned to ash. The farmer counts dead cattle by midday as the herd succumbs to heat that no shade can deflect. Milk production stops as surviving animals dehydrate faster than he can provide water. Greenhouses in the frozen zone become ice chambers where tomatoes freeze on their vines. A vegetable farmer breaks ice from greenhouse walls where condensation has formed frozen sheets. His entire winter crop dies in soil that has become as hard as concrete. Food distribution centers empty as deliveries stop arriving from agricultural regions that no longer function. Store shelves bare themselves as supply chains collapse under the weight of total crop failure. Hunger spreads faster than any disease. Railroad tracks buckle in the heat. Metal rails expand beyond their engineering limits. Train wheels derail as steel warps into dangerous curves. Roads and bridges meet extremes they were never built to face. Asphalt highways soften in the day zone. Concrete bridges crack in the frozen territories. A truck driver abandons his vehicle as the engine overheats on pavement that has become soft and sticky. His cargo of medical supplies sits stranded as the road beneath his tires begins to deform under the truck's weight. Airport runways develop stress fractures as the dark zone weakens the concrete. A passenger jet aborts takeoff as the pilot notices cracks appearing in the runway ahead of his aircraft. Bridges span temperature zones where one end experiences scorching heat while the other freezes. Expansion joints fail as steel and concrete expand and contract at rates that tear the structures apart. The pathways connecting the world crumble into isolation. Static fills a radio receiver. An emergency dispatcher presses buttons that produce no response. Communication towers overheat in the relentless sun. Cell phone networks collapse under the temperature extremes. Towers in the heat zone shut down before equipment catches fire. In the cold zone, moisture in cables turns to ice and splits them open. A mother tries repeatedly to call her daughter in another time zone. Her phone displays no service as the network infrastructure crumbles across the continent. Text messages queue without sending as satellites lose contact with ground stations. Internet servers overheat in data centers where cooling systems cannot cope with the outside air. Fiber optic cables buried underground crack as soil freezes and shifts in the dark territories. A radio operator tunes through frequencies that once carried voices across the globe. His speakers produce only the white noise of interference as transmission equipment fails in both temperature zones. Words die in the space between sender and receiver. Hospital lights flicker and go out. A surgeon operates by emergency lighting. His patient's heart monitor flatlines as power fails completely. Medical facilities in both zones lose equipment that patients depend on. Ventilators stop breathing for those who cannot breathe alone. Dialysis machines shut down as cooling systems overheat or freeze. A nurse manually squeezes an oxygen bag for a patient whose ventilator died with the power grid. Her arms ache as she maintains the rhythm that keeps her patient alive. Sweat drips onto the floor despite the hospital's frigid temperature. Ambulances refuse to start in the frozen zone as engines seize in the extreme cold. Emergency medical technicians carry patients on stretchers through snow that blocks roads to the nearest functioning hospital. A newborn baby cries in an incubator that no longer maintains proper temperature. The pediatric ward evacuates as heating systems fail and the hospital becomes too cold for vulnerable infants. Medicine surrenders to forces beyond its control. A president sits alone in an empty briefing room. His advisors have fled to find their own families. The red phone on his desk rings with no one to answer. Government buildings stand abandoned as officials prioritize personal survival over public service. Security guards leave their posts to protect their own homes. Classified documents blow through empty corridors as air conditioning fails and windows break. A mayor attempts to broadcast emergency instructions but finds the radio station deserted. Her voice echoes through empty studios where technicians should be operating transmission equipment. The microphone captures only her words and the silence that follows. Military commanders lose contact with their units as soldiers abandon bases to save family members. Tanks sit unmanned in motor pools while aircraft remain grounded without pilots or ground crews. A judge's gavel sits unused on a bench where court sessions will never resume. The scales of justice tilt permanently as the building around them cracks from temperature stress. Authority dissolves like salt in water that no longer flows. Smoke rises from a burning police station. Officers have abandoned their uniforms on empty desks. Badge numbers mean nothing when there are no laws to enforce. Police departments empty as officers face a choice between duty and family survival. Squad cars sit abandoned with their doors open and engines running. Radio dispatchers broadcast to no one as patrol units fail to respond to emergency calls. A fire station alarm rings continuously while the building stands empty. Fire trucks remain parked as their crews join the exodus toward the twilight zone. Hydrants freeze solid in the dark territories while others overheat in the burning zones. Prison guards unlock cell doors before fleeing as the facility loses power and climate control. Inmates wander empty corridors while sirens echo through concrete walls that no one monitors. A courthouse clerk burns legal documents in a trash can for warmth as heating systems fail. Years of legal precedent feed flames that provide the only light in the frozen building. Order melts faster than ice under the relentless sun. Bank vault doors stand wide open. Computer servers that track digital wealth sit silent and dark. Currency flows through broken windows like worthless confetti. Financial institutions close permanently as electronic banking systems fail with the power grid. ATMs display blank screens while safe deposit boxes remain locked with their contents trapped inside. Credit cards become plastic rectangles with no systems to process transactions. A banker watches customers crowd the lobby, demanding cash withdrawals. Their accounts exist only in computers that no longer function. Paper money scatters across marble floors as people realize currency cannot buy survival in a world without commerce. Stock exchanges halt trading permanently as communication networks collapse. Billions of dollars in digital assets vanish as data centers overheat or freeze beyond recovery. Market values become meaningless numbers in databases that no one can access. A pension fund manager shreds paperwork as his office fills with smoke from nearby fires. Retirement accounts disappear with the infrastructure that supported them. Wealth evaporates into the heated air of a dying economy. Classroom doors slam shut in the wind. Textbooks lie scattered across empty hallways. Chalk dust settles on abandoned blackboards. Educational institutions transform into refugee centers as families seek shelter from temperature extremes. Children who should be learning multiplication tables instead ration water bottles in gymnasiums converted to survival camps. A teacher burns books in a metal trash can to provide heat for students whose parents never return to collect them. Pages of literature curl and blacken as they feed flames that keep small hands warm in the frigid classroom. University laboratories sit empty as research that took decades to develop freezes or overheats into uselessness. Experiments end abruptly as graduate students flee with their families toward more survivable climates. A librarian locks the front doors knowing no one will return to check out books. The silence between the stacks becomes permanent as civilization's accumulated knowledge sits unused. Learning stops when survival begins. A church bell rings one last time. The rope breaks as metal expands in the heat. Congregations pray to empty pulpits where ministers once stood. Religious buildings become gathering places for people seeking answers to questions that have no earthly explanations. Stained glass windows crack from temperature stress, while faithful huddle together seeking comfort in shared confusion. A priest reads from Scripture by candlelight as his church loses electrical power. His congregation dwindles as members leave to find their families. The words echo off stone walls that grow colder with each passing hour. Prayer books freeze shut in the dark zones, while holy water evaporates in sanctuaries that have become furnaces. Crosses cast shadows that no longer move as the sun fixes its position in the sky. An imam calls believers to prayer in a mosque where no one comes to worship. His voice carries through empty chambers where faith confronts reality that defies divine explanation. Even God seems absent from a world that has stopped turning. Sweat evaporates instantly from a man's forehead. He stumbles across cracked earth near the equator. His body temperature climbs beyond what human organs can survive. Near the equator, every catastrophe stacks in one place. The sun presses down without mercy. Trade winds never arrive. The ground turns into a surface that burns skin within minutes. A woman in Singapore collapses on pavement that has become too hot to touch. Her shoes melt onto the asphalt as she tries to reach the shade of a building. The rubber leaves black streaks behind her failing steps. Children in Ecuador cry inside houses that have become ovens despite closed shutters and doors. Their parents pour precious water over their bodies as temperatures climb beyond the range of any thermometer designed for human habitation. A dog pants frantically in the shade of a palm tree whose fronds have turned brown and brittle. Its tongue hangs out as it seeks relief that does not exist anywhere on the superheated earth. The equator becomes a band of death that circles the planet. An Inuit village sits surrounded by rising water. Ice that stood for centuries melts under the redistributed ocean. Ancient hunting grounds disappear beneath unexpected seas. The poles avoid the worst heat, but the water comes anyway. The ocean shifts and climbs into places that once stayed dry. Ice sheets crack and slide as the shoreline rewrites itself faster than anyone can track. A research station in Antarctica watches instruments disappear underwater that had never reached their location. Scientists evacuate to higher ground as the ocean claims buildings constructed on what they believed was permanently frozen land. Polar bears swim desperately toward ice floes that no longer exist. The animals that adapted to life on solid ice now face an environment of water where their hunting methods become useless. A weather station operator in Greenland radios his final report as water enters his radio room. His equipment shorts out with sparks as salt water meets electrical systems never designed for marine conditions. Safety and drowning arrive together at the world's extremes. A lighthouse keeper watches the ocean approach. The wave tower rises higher than his beacon. Water moves like a solid wall that consumes everything. On the eastern coasts, the surge does not slow. Water shoves inland with momentum that never seems to end. Cities that took centuries to build disappear under a flood faster than any recorded tsunami. A beach house lifts off its foundation and floats briefly before the crushing water pressure tears it apart. Furniture bobs in the surge like toys in a bathtub while families cling to rooftops that soon join the debris. A harbor pilot guides his boat toward what should be deep water, but finds himself sailing over suburban neighborhoods. Stop signs and traffic lights pass beneath his hull as the ocean claims territory that had been dry for millennia. Hospitals evacuate patients to upper floors as the first floor fills with seawater. Nurses carry newborns up stairwells as the ocean rises through elevator shafts and emergency exits. The eastern edge of every continent becomes the ocean floor. Refugees stream into a mountain valley. Cars stretch in lines that reach beyond the horizon. The Western territories become humanity's ark. Farther inland, the West feels almost unreal. No ocean wall arrives here. The air stays survivable. Millions still pour in, hunting any place that holds moderate temperatures. A small town in Colorado watches its population grow from thousands to tens of thousands within hours. Gas stations run dry as vehicles loaded with possessions converge on any location offering moderate temperatures. A farmer opens his barn doors to shelter families whose cars have run out of fuel during the desperate migration. Children sleep on hay bales while adults ration water bottles in the only building large enough to hold the crowd. Traffic jams extend for hundreds of miles as highways designed for local traffic attempt to carry the population of entire coastal cities. Abandoned vehicles line roadsides where fuel ran out before reaching safety. The West becomes an island of survival in a sea of global catastrophe. Smoke signals rise from a mountain peak. Survivors communicate across valleys using methods older than civilization. Altitude provides the last refuge from a world gone mad. High ground offers space to breathe. Floodwater cannot reach as easily. The harshest heat loosens its grip. Old skills return, while modern systems die out below. A park ranger teaches city dwellers how to start fires without matches as refugees learn survival techniques their grandparents knew. Hands that once typed on keyboards now gather kindling from forests that provide the only remaining shelter. A mountain cabin designed for weekend visits now houses 3 families who share everything from food to blankets. Children who grew up with smartphones learn to identify edible plants as their parents realize money cannot buy survival. A weather station at high elevation becomes the last communication post connecting scattered groups of survivors. Solar panels still function where lower altitudes have lost all electrical power. The mountains stand as humanity's final fortress against a planet that no longer spins.